Okay. Okay, here we go. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, as Anne said, I've been working at the township for 8 years, and it's been an interesting journey for me because I went into community planning as well about 10 years ago, and then wound up at the township of Langley almost kind of by accident, and then kind of rekindled my interest in landscape architecture and started working on the Arboretum back in 2014. And at the time, you know, to be honest, I wasn't super interested in the project because it wasn't urban, it wasn't flashy, it wasn't kind of, I guess, what I thought I wanted to be doing. And as I got into it and saw the plants mature year over year, and saw the environment being improved, and the different animals and species and stuff, and listening to you guys speak, you know a lot more about animals or about ecosystems than I do. But when I was down there, I've spent a lot of time there in the last 8 years, and have watched different animals kind of colonize the space, I suppose, and it kind of ignited my interest back in landscape architecture, and I'm still working on the project today, and hopefully, if we get our budget over the next 2 years, then it'll be complete by the end of next year. So yeah, so I really appreciate being invited to talk to you today, and I want to reiterate that I'm not an expert in in all things natural, even plants. I'm still learning. So I'm basically going to kind of go through a bit of the history of the Arboretum, some of the steps that we've taken, and then focus a bit on some of the gardens, including David's Grove birding garden. That was a really interesting project that I really enjoyed working on, that had some really great volunteer effort, and kind of grew from something that was pretty modest to start to something which I'm really looking forward to coming into bloom this year, because it's just expanded so much. So so if I'm able to share my screen there, Lisa, I'll start my presentation. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and so can you guys see that screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm not sure how many people have seen the 2011 master plan that was done by Lease and Associates. It was the culmination of a couple of years of stakeholder engagement and design that basically dictated, or not really dictated, but is going to guide how the Arboretum was going to develop over the next decade. And so it came along in 2011, and I came on board in 2014. And so I have a photo here of the site back in 2006. And so as far as you know, it was basically, and I wasn't here at this time, but it was a farm field that really, as far as I understand, had no trees on it whatsoever. And so I always kind of look at some of these old photos and kind of marvel at, I guess, really what you can do with a site when you just start adding natural materials. So I always look at these old photos just for a bit of inspiration sometimes, and you know, particularly if there's a deadline or I've had a bad day, and just kind of realize how much work goes into these things. One of the projects that I started on when I first started with the township was the willow demonstration garden, and I'm assuming is everyone or are most people relatively familiar with the site? And if you haven't been there, I definitely recommend that you go there. Especially, it's a great place for dogs, as Nora can tell you. I see Patches. I see Nora and Patches there on a fairly regular basis. So this project, basically we kind of dug a hole in the ground and stuck about 2,500 willow whips into the ground, which, as I found out pretty quickly, was a lot more a lot more than we bargained for, and they obviously exploded. And we went through a couple of different iterations of how to sort of deal with these willows, and basically ultimately, because it was part of the quote unquote cultural use of plants area, eventually the willow whips will be available for classes to harvest the willow whips and use them for making. Basically, there's 7 species in there. Only one of them is native, I should say, but they're all they were all selected basically for their efficacy in using or in building wicker or willow furniture and willow living willow structures and that. So and this is one of the photos that I was out at the Arboretum on a snowy day and really like this photo. We more or less turned it into a hedge after a while, because the kind of weaving together was a bit too much for our maintenance department to deal with. But we did manage to build a couple of enclosures, and I would like to do a more uniform fence at some point, like a demonstration on the site at some point. But right now, we're turning it into a hedge that kind of has the bones of these willows that are weaved together. So yeah, and because there's 7 different species in there, there's probably about 4 different distinct colors that if you go when the new growth comes out, there's like a ghostly white color. There's 2 different shades of green. There's a couple of different shades of yellow, red, and more of a brown color. So it is, when the new growth comes up, before it gets cut off, obviously it's a really neat spectacle to see. And in future, there will be events around harvesting those willows. So we're kind of looking forward to programming those activities. So one of the projects I wanted to go over is the Rotary Interpretive Center, because it took up so much of my life in 2017 and 2018. It's I should say it is bookable by the public, and with the COVID restrictions having been lifted for the most part, it's a 40 occupancy building that you can rent by the hour, and I think it's only about $30 an hour. If you're a association or a non-for-profit, I think it's only about $18 an hour or something like that. So I would encourage you to, if you have something you want to rent it for, it's a really unique building to be rented out. But this photo is from 2017. It was right before Rivers Day. I think it was the day before Rivers Day or 2 days before Rivers Day. And the log building company basically hadn't had a chance to assemble it on their yard yet. So I begged them basically to come out and just give it a shot to try and assemble it in one shot right before Rivers Day, and they managed to do it. So this was a really this was a pretty great day. We had some pretty spectacular weather there in September in 2017. So now I think this might have been one of the first deer that I saw myself. Anyway, I'm sure you guys have seen quite a few more in earlier years, but it kind of startled me the first time that I saw it. And it's funny that it was standing in front of all those styrofoam boxes, because those styrofoam boxes wound up making up the base for most of the front and the side of the Arboretum, or of the Rotary Interpretive Center, because the building was set up out of the ground because it was it's in a floodplain. So we had to be a certain amount over the natural boundary of the Nikamekel. And so the geotech engineer made us put in lightweight fill. And I had worked on some projects in Burnaby on roof decks where we had to use lightweight fill, and we used this, and it's pretty low cost. And I thought it was really appropriate that they're forestry seed trays in an arboretum. So next time you're there, that's what you're walking on. And it's I can't remember how many thousands of them there were, but they were about a tenth of the cost of the high density foam that we were going to put in there. So it was a bit of effort to stack them all up. It looks kind of a bit like a ziggurat or something like that. So that's amazingly, none of it has settled, and so I guess the geotech was right. But at the time I was grumbling. Yeah, that's just an interesting aside there. This is obviously the finished building. It opened officially, I suppose, in July 2019, although I don't think we actually got our full building permit until about 3 months afterwards. And then, of course, everyone knows what happened in 2020. So unfortunately, the building was more or less shut down for a couple of years. So one of the gardens that we were very fortunate to receive donations from Cedar Rim was the pollinator garden, and this is it in 2018. And it's kind of amazing to look at it like this, because this is, I think I took this in 2019, and since then I've added some more plants, some more diversity in there. You can see Crocosmia and Black-eyed Susan and Nepeta in the background there. I think there's probably almost, I would say, 30-35 species now in there, and I can send you guys the full list of this stuff. Some of the stuff I just kind of grabbed when I was at nurseries and just thought I'd give it a try. So I have to update the list myself. But and hopefully let me know if this video binds up. But the hummingbirds really love the Crocosmia, and as soon as we put that Crocosmia in there, the hummingbirds really gravitated towards that site. And I was just out there yesterday, and I was happy to see that the hummingbirds are back. I know that some of them died in that extreme cold, so I was very happy to see the ones, and I think they know who I am, because I'm there all the time. So anyway, and that speaking of birds, brings us to David's Grove Memorial Bird Garden. And I just like to say that David gave so much to the Arboretum, and in particular, when we were building the Rotary Interpretive Center, he wired most of the building himself. He secured $30,000 worth of window donations and many other donations, and was just a very memorable character to have worked with on that. So, and I never knew when I was working with him on that he was such an avid birder, of course, with Nora. So it just made sense that his garden was a birding garden. So and this is just a copy of the interpretive sign that's out there, and I would encourage you to go out and read it, because it tells a little bit about David's story. And so it started in May of 2020, and it was Bill Lindahl and Les Clay and myself out there, and some of the township employees that I begged our operations department to come help us out with a couple of backhoes. And so it started out and was kind of inconspicuous, and it had a couple of benches, and that winter, I remember half of it was underwater for a bit of the time because of the way that the grading went. So the next spring, and we got our budgets approved for 2021, we really wanted to give it some more of the dignity that it deserved. And so this was, I think, my original planting plan for David's Grove, and you know, there's some plants in there like Alamankier, or the serviceberry, Rosa rugosa, salvia. There's a couple of species of viburnum. There's a number of different species of Physocarpus, or ninebark. There was Panicetum. I still haven't got the Gaultheria in there, but I'm waiting for some nice shade, which there is now with those oak trees, that we're going to get that in there. There's and there was a couple of species of juniper and some other. I can send you the original list. And so as we move forward, not backwards, forwards, we started to add more species. And I think part of that was also is that I was learning, and I wanted to see some more variety in there and what's working with what. I can send you this plan as well. I don't expect you to read those little the little list there, but we started to add some Echinacea, some Helenium, a couple of different species of Cornus sericea. There was some Rebeckia, and then at that time I wanted to bring in some sumac, but our operations department forbade me to do that, because I know that they can be invasive if they're allowed to run. So, but I wound up winning the battle in the end, and I got some Tiger Eyes sumac in there that aren't as invasive, and I put them in pots to make sure that they didn't run. So this is a photo of it in I think is about June of 2021 of last year. So we really got a lot more variety in there. I'm very excited to see how it comes back this year, because in the fall I added more plants, and I can send you the full list of it. And I do notice that when I go back there, when I went back there in the fall, I could see it. And like I said, I'm not, I would not consider myself a birder. I don't know the names or the species of a lot of the birds, but I just noticed that there was a lot of different kinds and colors of birds that were coming through there. And I'm really excited to see how that builds on this year. One of the, in April of that year of 2021, and obviously, I'm sure a lot of you know Les Clay. He had donated quite a lot of his collection to the Arboretum, which we put to the west of the building. And it just seemed, once we got all the plants in there, his garden was just a site that kept on giving. And there was more plants that he had to give. And one of the ones that it just really I fell in love with was this 30-year-old Aurelia alata. and it has such a ghostly branching pattern. They're a native to Japan, and I'd learned that birds apparently do like them, and and it's a really beautiful tree and not one that we had in the Arboretum. So I got a 90-inch tree spade, and they are a fairly brittle tree, and I wasn't absolutely sure how it was going to fare. But the Maple Leaf Tree Movers did a fantastic job, and I'm just going to show you this video of it going in. And hopefully you can all see the video. And they came in and they pre-dug the hole, and they popped it in about 12 inches out of the ground, so that we could mound up around it and create a bit of drainage. But it was a beautiful day in April, and it really kind of is one of the crown jewels, I think, of that garden. And oh, there we go. So yeah, it's we're going to add to it again this year. We've just actually planted Cercis canadensis, a redbud, a forest pansy, just kind of at the base, at the throat of that garden, just about 3 days ago. And Les also donated a number of rhododendrons to that garden too. So and one of the things that I added to a few of the gardens was actually bird baths. I'd be interested in getting some of your opinion on how to attract more birds and how to make them more comfortable. I had learned that you know, obviously the birds can die of infection if they don't get washed. So so I started to put bird baths in a few of the gardens, and would fill them up periodically as I was down at the Arboretum. So I'm going to continue to do that this year, and we are going to get a more robust, heavier bird bath in the middle of David's Grove garden there. So the deer seem to really enjoy the site, and I apologize for my terrible UK accent that I was doing in that video. For some reason I felt like the deer were British. I'm not really sure. So they didn't respond. I was devastated, but it is really the amount of wildlife that I've seen there, you know, in the 8 years that I have been working on the project has really made me understand that things happen over time, and you know, like there's layers of species that have to be there in order to attract other species, and if you kind of build on it bit by bit, you know, the natural life does notice, and it really brings me a lot of joy that it's been a site that attracts natural wildlife. And I'd be very interested to know what kind of bird species and what kind of other animals you've seen on that site. I know when I was working on the Dyer's Garden, there was a family of killdeers that the mother had some eggs and a nest that she had kind of in the chicken wire enclosure that we built for that Amur maple there that's in the Dyer's Garden. And then the babies hatched, and while I was down there doing some of my own planting on the weekends, you know, observed their I suppose, ritual of teaching the babies how to be little birds, and then one day they were gone. So and I, from time to time, I still do see the killdeers there, but I'd be interested to know what sort of species you guys have seen there, and if you've seen the number of species grow. So I'm available to answer any questions or about that.
I have a quick question, Lyle.
Sure.
Thank you very much. It looks absolutely beautiful. The area which is in the center of the complex of the Arboretum at the moment is long wild grass.
Yeah, you mean the areas kind of behind the building there?
Behind the building and between the memorial, there's an area of wild grass on both sides. There's a savanna sparrow colony there.
Oh, really?
Which on both sides of the new path, which bisects the center area.
Okay.
There were, and last year, about a dozen savanna sparrows.
Oh, wow.
I talked to David about it, and he allowed the grass not to be cut until the fledglings had left, because I noticed at the moment there's less and less wild area in the center of the park.
Right.
And there's a breeding colony of savanna sparrows there during the springtime, early summer.
Okay.
And is it a plan to get rid of all the wild area, what we would term, well, I suppose you could term wild grass area?
No, we definitely want to leave as much of that wild area there as we can.
Yeah.
The only place where we're going to be adding garden, or I mean, basically everything that's cut grass right now, or that everything that's being cut right now is going to continue to be cut. The parts that are left long, except for over kind of by where the farm demonstration is, that's all going to be left naturalized.
Okay, because in there's thistles and there's native plants and weeds which the birds feed on.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's a lot of insects in there, and that's good news, because that was worrying, the fact that it seemed to be becoming more manicured to the point where there's a fine balance. There's a fine balance between the problem is
definitely.
The problem is across the street there's a couple of fields which get hayed right in the middle of the time when the birds are fledglings.
Oh, okay.
So they cut the hay exactly when the birds are just emerging from the nest.
Right.
And what I'm trying to get over is that if you're going to cut it for whatever reasons, could it be possibly, later in June?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's excellent information, and I have noticed. I personally really like the naturalized grass there, and that it has a bit of a contrast to the parts that are manicured.
Yeah.
So I would love to have that information so that I can make sure that the maintenance crews don't, because that long grass basically gets cut once a year. So I would love to have that information to make sure they don't go in and do that when when the birds are fledgling, as you say. So if can you send me an email, or can someone send me an email kind of with that information?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Lisa can forward the email.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we do eBird counts there, and we keep a record of the birds which arrive and when they leave, and how many numbers. We have some records. A number of us have records.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if there's basically if there's maintenance activities on the Arboretum that are going to be conflicting with natural cycles of birds and other animals there that can be moved to other times, that, I mean, most of the time, it's just the maintenance people don't know that. So if you can send me as much of that information as possible, then I'll forward it to operations and do my best to make sure that, you know, that doesn't happen, that those processes aren't interrupted.
Yeah, I think by July the 1st, you're pretty safe to
Okay.
cut. But, yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
And
Good job.
And to build on John's comment in regards to eBird, eBird actually has a designated hotspot there for the Doubleday Arboretum. So that's historical data that's publicly accessible if you have an eBird account. So you could see every bird that's cited by somebody who's gone and used eBird there, and in turn have historical data on what has been seen there, what time of the year, you know, all the different species.
Right. Okay. It sounds like I better get one of these accounts.
Yeah, and you can do it. I've seen where, you know, a society, a group, an individual under, you know, a certain name. It doesn't have to be a personal one. They'll open an account for, like yourself, you could call it something, you know, bird sightings at. I'm just making suggestions, but
Yeah,
you can do that instead of having your name against it, but you're the owner of the account. But you can then access all that information, and you see birds, you can put in an eBird list when you're doing it. It's a great way to learn.
yeah. Well, I certainly have a lot to learn when it comes to that.
Niall, the gardens are just beautiful in the summer. I've been there, and there is lots of birds. We've birded through there, and all of those trees beside the new building are just beautiful. We were there this spring, and we birded around there, and there's lots of birds there, and it's a great thing that John and Eric just told you, because that's the information you need, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think I mean, that one of the things that's great about the Arboretum is that it's a real educational site. It's an educational tool. There's a lot of classes that go there. This is information that they should be learning, and this is information that young people should be learning. And I mean, LEPS has done a fabulous job with educational programs there, and we want to encourage the wildlife there, and you know, and it's a balance that's drawn between the naturalized part and the manicured part, but we want to encourage species to be in there for these kinds of activities. So it's excellent information.
Brian, you had a question?
I agree with some of the other people's comments they made about the park, and you can't harbor marvel all the beautiful plants you've got and the variety you have and the volume you have. Just wanted a quick question. What is the policy on identifying all the different plant species? Do you have a policy on how you go about that, or what you do?
Well, basically the 2009 master plan document and then the 2011 master plan, it set out areas and it was very general at first. It basically said there's going to be an area for cultural use of plants. There's going to be an area for you know, what they called aesthetic use of plants, and then for indigenous plants and more sort of, you know, sustainable, and although I don't like that word a lot of the time, but and plants that have value to the environment and to species. So we kind of interpreted it as we move forward, and then kind of jumped on opportunities as well as they came up. And so like the willow demonstration garden, we actually had the same landscape architect that did the master plan, did a detailed plan for that they did some research on species that were for willow crafts and that kind of thing, and we went out and got those species. So whereas say for instance Les Clay's donation garden when he donated his material. It kind of became, you know, the Les Clay rhododendron or azalea donation garden that is more along the lines of the aesthetic use of plants, and showing people that part. And so we're kind of experimenting as we go, taking opportunities and building on the original master plan. But we're always open to you know, trying different species out there. So and it's not we've just finished a feature conifer garden. We just Cedar Rim again has been really generous to our project and donated a bunch of plant material. And if you have a chance to go down to the Arboretum here in the next little bit when the weather improves, I guess, you'll see that the sort of berm or the mound that had been there, there's a couple of sequoias that sort of appeared there. And all around that area is all planted up with conifers now. So, and those were kind of selected as a you know, as a collaboration between Cedar Rim and our horticulture department, that kind of walked their yard basically and put together a plan based on more on the aesthetic of it. Whereas the bird garden, it started out as kind of like a layer of planting that was more naturalized, more native species, and then we began to add more you know, bird attracting species that weren't native, and just kind of experimenting. A lot of what's going on down there is a lot of experimenting, and you know, we're always open to suggestions. And you know, I know that most people like yourselves and people in horticulture know more than I do about these things, so I'm always open to suggestions.
You know, actually, what I meant though is you go there to any garden and you see a plant, you know, that's a nice plant, and I'm always looking for what the name of the plant is. So,
I see.
Do you guys have a policy as how you go about identifying the plants that are there for the general public?
Oh, okay, I see. Sorry, I just gave you a big long-winded answer. This year, that's a project that's kind of been on my list for a number of years now. We started to basically, by the end of this year, we want every plant down there to have an identification on it.
Oh.
And with our budget that hopefully gets approved here next month, that's part of that budget. And what I would like to do is get a QR code on there so you can take a picture and go to the list. We're still trying to get our IT department comfortable with QR codes, but we've identified some of the plants out there. We did when we started doing the Dyer's garden, and then we just got away from it. So by the end of this year, we want to have everything down there identified with a stake, but then also with something that you can take a picture of the QR code and look at the list.
Niall, there was a question from Toots asking if there's a Japanese garden plan.
There isn't a Japanese garden plan per se. We have a Korean garden that's coming in with the Gapyeong stone, and there was always a plan to surround that Gapyeong stone with a Korean style garden. Korean and Japanese gardens are fairly similar. A lot of the plant material is similar, although the principles that they're designed by are a little bit different. They look fairly similar. And so we've got a couple of Pinus densiflora out there, which actually can be called Korean or Japanese red pine. And so that's those two Pinus densiflora, one on either side of the Gapyeong stone, are the beginnings of the Korean garden there. So I guess the answer is no. But the Korean garden will have a lot of the same elements that the Japanese garden would have.
Joanne, you had a question?
Yes, the gardens are just beautiful. I think it's a real show place for the township of Langley. And I
Oh,
know
great. Thank
whenever
you.
somebody comes to town and I take them there, it's just like, there's so few beautiful gardens left because a lot of them were private in the past. So I think we're really fortunate to have it. I love it in the spring. I love it in the summer. It's also great for photographs, like some of the blooming flowers and the rose
Oh,
garden.
yeah.
Fantastic. Also, I know they've been having the farmers market there last year.
Yep.
And I heard something about that the parking lot was going to be expanded. Is that still a plan?
Yeah, provided we get our budget for this year. I feel like that's like every sentence that comes out of my mouth these days. But we are upgrading the parking lot this year, provided we get our budget. It's not an expansion of the parking lot. It's just, we're going to put down permeable pavers, provided the cost isn't too exorbitant in the parking stalls, and then with a asphalt drive aisle. So the number of stalls will be more or less the same than what's there. There will be more parking on the other side of Fraser Highway once we start to develop that park site there. I'm not sure how many people know, but the township has purchased the property on the other side of Fraser Highway, the old berry farm. So there will be more parking on that side close to the barn, and probably depending on how the lease goes with the learning farm. I think the learning farm activities may move over there. I'm not sure, but that's where any expanded parking will be in the future, is on the other side of Fraser Highway.
So is that family?
And sorry, you had a question there about the farmers market. As far as I understand, and Lisa, you could maybe chime in, but I believe that the farmers market is happening again this year.
Yep.
And it was fantastic last year.
So are they going to use the tunnel under Fraser Highway that the cows used to use?
Yeah, that as far as I understand is going to be kind of cleaned up and lighting put in there to connect the two parks. So that's the plan for the meantime.
Jane, you had a question? Oh, we can't hear you, Jane. Can anyone hear Jane?
No, I can't hear her, sorry.
Jane, we can't hear you. You might be able to put something in the chat. If you go down to the bottom, you could type it into the chat. Is there another question while we're waiting for Jane?
Well, I suppose the question is about haying of those fields. I know if you leave the hay in too late, then the hay is not as valuable.
Right, yeah, and I have to be honest, I don't know what, or I guess who is in charge of that contract at the moment. And when the township takes possession of it, which I believe is this year, if that haying is going to continue or if it's going to be managed by the same people. So I would put that in the email because it is, I mean, that is very significant. So I would put that in the email that you can send me about the wildlife activity there, and you know, it's always worth asking the question.
Yeah.
Niall, Jane's question came up in
Yeah.
the box. Is the garden?
Yeah, I see that.
Field trip destinations for the Chilliwack nature or nature Chilliwack.
Yeah, sure. In terms of it would depend on whether you wanted to use the Rotary Interpretive Center or the picnic shelter. You know, if you're going to use or say the entire field or something like the farmers market does, then you would phone Township of Langley Parks bookings in order to book the features there. Other than that, if you're going to do a field trip, it's a public site that is large enough to accept buses. If you wanted to send me an email, I can always, if it works with my schedule, I'm always looking for a reason to get out of the office. So, I'd be happy to give your group a little tour if you wanted to, and just send me an email. Like I said, I'm always looking for a reason to go down there.
Anthea, I saw your hand go up at one point, Anthea.
Yeah, just wondering, will the fields continue to exist on the other side of Fraser? Because there are barn owls in that barn and they hunt over those fields and they're a
Right.
species at risk.
Yeah, I'm not absolutely sure what the plan is for that part yet. I think for the near future, it's going to be left. I think partly natural, or it's going to be managed the same as it is now, with trail connections, and one part of it being like a grass open space with trails, and then either the farm demonstration moving over there or an extension to the farm demonstration. So I could definitely see part of it being left natural, and but I think when we get into designing that site, there is going to be a public open house when we get into it. So that's really important information, and I would encourage you all to keep an eye out for that, and make your voices heard when it comes to that, because when we get that information, it is information that is looked at, and oftentimes we won't know things like that. So so I think that's really valid, and I'll keep you in touch in terms of what open house or what kind of open houses there are, because I certainly would like to see part of it being left naturalized or grass like that.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
I have one more question. Niall, have you been down to Terra Nova in Richmond, Terra Nova Park in Richmond?
You know what, I haven't. I worked in the office that did that project back in like 2009 or 8 or something it was, and I remember seeing that project on the list, and I didn't work on it personally, but I know of it, and I've been meaning to go down there and visit it.
It has a really good balance between garden plots, wild things left to grow wild, playground.
Okay.
It's a really good mix. It's a really good spot for wildlife.
Okay.
If you're down that way, it might give you some thoughts about the new field area.
Yeah, right. No, that's great. I'm absolutely going to go down there, because I've been, like I said, I've been aware of that project for a long time, but I just don't get down to Richmond very often. So I'm definitely going to head down there and take a look. Thanks for that.
Christine, you had a question?
Yeah, Neil, the 2011 plan that you mentioned that you have, what percentage of that is complete, and when do you anticipate it being, completed according to that plan? What year have you got in mind for your end goalpost?
I think for completion, we're looking at the end of 2023, and I would say we're probably about 3/4 of the way done.
Okay. Yeah, it's a lovely looking project.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to this year, and keeping my fingers crossed behind my back, in the dark, whatever, to make sure that we get our budget for this year, because it's really going to be critical with kind of cleaning up the parking lot, finishing off all the stormwater management in between the parking lot and the gardens. And so by the end of this year, it's really going to look spectacular.
Yeah. Do you have a kind of a community support group at all, who would continue to maybe help raise funds, etc., in the future? Friends of, or something like that.
Yep. Yeah. There's the Arboretum and Botanical Society of Langley, and it's I'm like a township liaison basically on that for that society, and we have a couple of lets members on it as well. And I would encourage you to go to the website. It's abslangley .ca. Or I better check to make sure it's .net, or I can send you the website. We just launched it just this past year, and we meet once a month, and there's also an AGM that's usually well, I guess it's at different times, but which the public can also attend. So I can send that information out for sure. There's basically you can be a member of the Arboretum and Botanical Society of Langley, and you get discounts at nurseries, and it's a small fee, a yearly fee, and basically that allows us to raise money. We just raised money for the Korean War Memorial Garden there that's going around the Gapyeong Stone. And actually the Korean community was really generous, and it was a very successful fundraiser. So it was kind of our first big one, and it went it's gone really well. So I'll pass that information along, but it's the Arboretum and Botanical Society of Langley.
Okay.
It's abslangley.ca.
Yeah, I believe it's CA. It might be .net.
No, it is CA. I just
Oh,
said-
okay, great. Thank you for that.
Okay,
Thanks for that.
thank you. Yeah.
Ted, you had a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering about the salmon in the Nickelmackle River there. Do you do any interpretation on that, or do you plan to in the future?
You know what? When we were building the gabion walls behind the building, one of the fellows who brought volunteers, what was his last name? It was the Nickelmackle Enhancement Society, Jim. His
Jim
last name is
Armstrong. Jim
I
Armstrong?
think it's Jim
Yes.
Armstrong.
Yeah, it was Jim Armstrong, and he brought up the idea of a spawning channel coming off the Nickelmackle. It's something that really excited me a lot, and I think it's something that we do if there's an opportunity to do enhancements in that site or interpretive value on that site. I'm all for it. And he basically he suggested the idea, and I said I was interested. And basically, if a group came to us or to the Arboretum and Botanical Society of Langley and said, we want to do a spawning channel, this is what it's going to take, then it would go through the ABSL in terms of the ABSL is kind of the filter, or it's kind of the liaison between the Arboretum and the township. So I'm definitely in favor of that. And if a proposal came forward that we could take to council, I think it would probably be successful.
We're talking about Fraser Creek, but Fraser Creek is very close to the airport. So I just wondered if it should be on the Arbor ribbon trails that are farther away from
Oh, I see. Okay.
hills and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it would be difficult to do a spawning channel from the Nickelmackle. But yeah, from Fraser Creek, that, would be more feasible. And that's why somebody with that kind of knowledge, if they can bring that forward and tell us how to do it, we would certainly be open to it.
Are there any other questions for Niall?
Just wondered if Niall gets a count of how many visitors go in the Arboretum now. I remember when there was very few trees there, and it's sure looking lovely now. So you must be getting more and more visitors.
Yeah, well, I certainly, we don't really have a count, but there are so many more regulars there. And I just bought an electric car today. I just went in, it took 8 months for it to get here. And I finally went in and did the paperwork and picked it up. And the finance guy, when he was looking at my profession, and he said, "Oh, that's interesting. What do you do?" And then we were talking a bit on it, and he said he lived in Murrayville. And I said, "Oh, do you ever go to the Arboretum?" And he was like, "Yeah, absolutely. I go there every week with my dog, and we go for a walk." And there's so many more people now that I speak to that it's kind of a regular walking space for them. So I guess I kind of see it visually, and from talking to people. I don't have any counts, but I know that that building is starting to get rented out a lot more, and it's going to get rented out a heck of a lot more. And that parking lot is, you know, I guess I'd hate to see a day when you can't get a parking spot at all, but that would maybe encourage more people to walk there. But there is certainly a lot more people that go there, but I don't really have a count at this point.
The only thing with the dogs is I was told I should have my dog on the leash because of the Savannah sparrows and other species of birds that are in the grass.
Yeah.
So we
Okay.
really should have more signs saying the dogs are to be on their leash.
Yeah, and it's kind of, you know what, it's enforcement as well. And because I know that it's just not really enforced there. So and when I say that, I mean that it's just not, we just don't have the personnel there. But your point is well taken, that with ground nesting birds and the amount of wildlife that are there, that it's something that really has to be addressed. And I think, you know, signage only goes so far. It's really eventually what I'd like to do is put an off-leash dog park on the other side of Fraser Creek, kind of where that big series of knolls is up there. Now, I wouldn't want to mow it all down because I'm sure that it's habitat value, but the airport won't let me plant any trees over there. So, you know, I would like to see an off-leash dog park in that area so that people don't feel like they have to keep their dogs off the leash.
Yeah, but we could put signs that don't just say dogs should be have to be on leash. There should be, you know, something that's
a reason.
Nesting birds, dogs have to be on, so that they understand why we're asking for that.
You know what, that's a really good point. And I think if we key on the nesting birds part, then I think, you know, I think that's a good point, Nora. And let's keep bringing that up in the ABSL.
Specifically ground nesting birds, because people always think of birds nesting in trees.
Yeah, exactly. Really that's just like the killdeers.
Yeah.
You know, when I saw them nesting in the ground too. And, you know, I think you're bang on with that, to be honest. And I think let's make sure that that keeps coming up in the ABSL meetings too. And Nora, if you can keep on me about that, and just please keep reminding me. You know, as Lisa knows, that's the only way to get things done with me.
Well, if we make it part of education, you know, about protecting wildlife.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's accepted.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ryan, you had a question?
I'm talking, interesting comment about enforcement. The only reason I think we enforce seatbelt, we have a lot of people using seatbelts because we enforce them. I think a lot of the reason we have people obeying the speed limit is because we enforce them. And, you know, the dogs in the park, if you say there for the protection of nesting birds, other than the odd person who likes to let their dog run while they're off leash, I don't think we want dogs running around in January because there's no birds nesting. So it's an enforcement thing.
Yeah, it is an enforcement thing, but I do also think that if there's a compelling reason, and also like when I'm there, I've been reluctant to say, can you keep your dog on a leash? Because I just, you know, but now if I can say, look, there's nesting birds here, if you would really just mind keeping your dog on a leash. I think people are reasonable for the most part, you know, or at least I like to think so.
I think people who walk around there also don't like dogs walk off leash.
Yeah, it is something that needs to be addressed. I agree.
All righty. So just in the comments, Nora, Jane asked if you can send Niall send her Niall's contact info in the comments. Deborah from, I think it's the Cougar Creek Streamkeepers, she says it's excellent, very informative. Thank you very much. She'll be visiting the Arboretum soon. So good job, Niall. Good job.
Great.
There was a vote from Annie Caps regarding the Township of Langley councillors that did not vote favor or did vote in favor of the development
Oh, okay.
in Campbell Valley or Campbell.
Interesting. Yeah, well, it's an election year, so you
Yep.
know,
Absolutely.
get out and vote, people.
Yes, and Toots, you asked how do you go to become a member for the ABSL? Contact the website that
Yeah, the website's the best way.
.ca.
Yeah, there's a form on the website.
Perfect. And there's also Hada says, thank you very much for your work and sharing your presentation now, and happy St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, I'm gonna go home and have a beer.
Sounds good. And there's another thank you from John. And I want to add that like most of my understanding of the area, the Arboretum is of course the demonstration garden and the learning farm. So lovely to be able to learn more about it. And just while I have a few people here, the City Nature Challenge for Greater Vancouver area has asked LEPs if they'd be willing to do some sort of a BioBlitz. And I'm wondering if the weekend of the City Nature Challenge in beginning of June, I believe, if maybe we want to do a BioBlitz at Derek Doubleday Arboretum, guys. Any thoughts? We can get
There's
more than
just
30.
as long as it's not, is it Glen Valley, the first weekend has the bird.
Yeah, I'll be at the Glen Valley Bird Count, so it'll be the other day.
Okay.
And this Saturday is CD Saturday at the Arboretum.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yep. So if anyone wants seeds, or there's a couple presentations as well that they're doing CD Saturday, so an excuse to get out to the Arboretum and do more than just looking at plants and birds.
Yeah,
So it's
right.
10 to 2, isn't it? 10 to 2?
I believe you have it right. Yes, Nora. Good time. So thank you so much, Niall.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to send me an email with some more questions and stuff, thanks very much. Please feel free to send me an email with more questions and yeah, or more information there, or if you're looking for plant lists and stuff like that. So yeah, you can circulate my email there, Lisa, if you want to.
Thank you very much, Niall.
Okay.
Coming out
I all
now.
enjoyed it.
All right. Happy St. Patty's.
Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Good night.
you.